everyone, welcome to Art of the Unquiet Grave. If you're new here, I'm Ash, and as I'm shooting this, we're only a few days away from Halloween. So I can't believe how quickly it's gone this year, but I say that every year, I think. In any event, I thought since we're so close to Halloween, that would be a great time and opportunity to sort of get back to the bones of our channel, if you will, and do another spooky project. So if you happen to see one of our previous projects where we took a model of conjoined twins, a skeleton, and we antiqued and aged them and then made a cabinet of curiosities for them. In today's video, I'm going to take some of those techniques and show you how to apply them on a much larger scale to a 5-foot tall life-size skeleton. Now there's a lot of differences and nuances from what we did with our conjoined twins, since they were resin and obviously a much smaller scale. This one is a $30 5-foot tall cheap skeleton that I got from Walmart. So in my personal aesthetic, I don't tend to like things that are too gory. There's a lot of great videos on YouTube that have like corpsing videos for how to antique skeletons. If you're not familiar with what corpsing is, it's basically where you take a skeleton and you make it look grungy, dirty, like maybe like it crawled out of a grave, or that it has some blood, maybe bits of flesh stuck to it still. So basically taking it and making it look gorier, which are great if you have like a haunt. But my personal aesthetic is obviously spooky, but I tend to like it more like elegant spooky, if that makes sense. I've said that before, but hopefully it'll make sense at the end of this what I mean by that. But if you can sort of keep in mind that I'm going more for like a catacombs-esque skeleton rather than a haunted house, if you get my drift. So a very ancient, decrepit skeleton, but like someone loved it, instead of it being covered in gore. So anyway, so that's what we'll be doing in this video today. But before we jump into the tutorial, I did want to give you one small disclaimer. When I tend to do my projects, I get very involved in them and sometimes forget about like the shooting elements of videos, which is obviously horrible for someone who's doing YouTube. But at the end of this video, I forgot to get a shot of the skeleton by itself. And that being said, there is a little bit of a hint for what we're going to be doing to the skeleton in the next video, like how we're going to be displaying it and what we're turning him into. So sorry about that, but if you have any guesses at the end of this video for what we'll be doing in the next video where we finish the skeleton up for what he's going to become, drop a comment down below and let me know what your guess is. I'd love to see what you think. Anyway, enough of my babbling. We'll get into the tutorial and I will see you at the end for a little wrap up.
Okay, so here is the skeleton that I got from Walmart for, I think it was like $30. Now he is obviously a life-size skeleton. He measures about 5 feet tall, which is perfect for the project that we're going to be using him for. So the first step is I'm just going to take some dry Dex, which is a spackle. It starts sort of pinkish and it's supposed to dry to a white when you know that it's sandable and paintable. This was pretty dried out, to be honest, but it still worked in a pinch. If you don't have any spackle, you could also use like Crayola Model Magic, air dry clay, basically anything that you can use to fill in those crevices. Now for what I'm using him for, I don't need him to be posable anymore, so I also put some in his joints as well, just to cover those screws. Now we're going to go back in and sand that later, so if it's chunky right now, that's perfectly fine. Just try to get like a base layer down to cover it. Now the next thing you're going to do is take some acetone nail polish remover and we're going to take out that black paint on his eyes and his nose. Obviously that doesn't look the most realistic, so we're just going to try to get a cleaner slate for when we go back in and reshade those areas later. Now the crevices in his eyes and his nose, I just kind of like let it pool in there a little bit, like made a puddle if you will, and then tried to go back in and rub all that out with a paper towel. I didn't get all the paint out, and you might have that issue too, but that's okay since we're going to go repaint it later. If you have some darker paint still stuck in the crevices, it'll just sort of act as like a deeper shadow. Okay, so when I was done removing the paint from his eyes and his nose, that gave the spackle enough time to dry. So here I'm just taking a sheet of sandpaper that I got in a pack from Dollar Tree, and I'm just gently going over all those areas to try to get it to a smoother finish so we can get ready to paint him. And Folk Art brand is my favorite. It's like the most opaque acrylic paint that I use. So here we're going in and we're starting with the darkest colors first. So we're putting some dark brown in his eyes and his nose. Now, like I said in the beginning, we want him to look sort of like a decrepit, catacomb skeleton and not gory. So we're using more browns and yellows to show aging as opposed to like usually when people do like corpsing tutorials, they use straight up black or like a really dark brown over the whole body to make them look dirty. We're not going to be doing that. We're just saving the dark brown parts for like the orifices to sort of just accentuate the shading there. So I'm putting that, as you can see, in his eyes, his nose, and across his teeth. We're just trying to accentuate all of those crevices and the little nooks and crannies. And now I'm just taking a dry paper towel and we're going to wipe some of that back and sort of smear it around the cheekbones and on his chin just to give a little bit more shading there. Now you might have to play with this a few times before you get it to look the way that you like. You might have to layer some darker paints, maybe take some more paint out. So this is sort of just like a preference for when you get it to where you like it. Now, as you can see, I ended up wiping most of that back and I'm just sort of trying to do like a first base coat around his face. So now that you can see, that brought out some of the detail in his teeth and around his cheekbones. And now I'm going in with just like a mustard yellow and I'm mixing that with the brown. If you want your skeletons to look really aged, you get this disgusting shade of brown here. So this like, I'm not going to say what it looks like, but you know what it looks like. You're going to take that on a wide brush just to save yourself some time. So this is just like a furniture paintbrush that I think I also got at Dollar Tree. And I'm just painting that across the whole surface of his body. So starting with his rib cage, getting in all the crevices around his shoulders, arms, and we're going to continue that all over the whole body. And we're just going to wipe back as we go. Now you can see after that's wiped back that it leaves sort of like a nice aged antiqued stain, if you will. So it's like, I think if you want them to look old, but not like they're corpsed, not like they're dirty, yellow and like a mid-tone brown, that's the way to go. So that's my best tip for you. Now his skull was a different type of plastic than the body, so I was really trying to saturate that before I wiped it back. And then I'm just taking a dry paper towel and we're wiping off that excess. Now, if you're having a hard time getting into like the nooks and crannies around the jaw or like some of those very like detailed sections around toward the back of the head, you can thin your paint out with some water and that'll help it sort of sink into those little tighter spaces there. It'll also help stretch your paint too if you're starting to run low. Now, a thing that you'll find on plastic skeletons is that the texture of the plastic tends to be different on certain areas of the body. Like the body might be more rigid plastic than the head or vice versa. So you might have to play with your tones a little bit if the paint ends up soaking into each texture differently. So here I'm just kind of trying to match everything up. He's going to look very dark for a second, but when we go wipe it back, you'll see, sort of the desired effect that we're getting. Now here I think this is sort of a fun angle because you can see what a drastic difference this is making already. If you look, into the underside of his ribs there, you can see that original white, or like right here on his legs. You can see what a difference it made in terms of sort of making him look, ancient. So here I'm just doing that same dry brushing and wiping back technique on the legs, around the knees. And again, too, I'm not going to need him to be posable later, so some of those joints won't matter as much, but we'll address that in the next video if we have any, like, visible, glaringly, obviously fake joints. So too, you might notice as you're painting your skeletons and as you're wiping it back, where you put that spackling, it might also sort of soak up the paint. If you find that that happens, you can take this like little slurry here. So it's the same mixture of paint that I used, but we're just taking it with water, and that helps sort of soak into the spackle too. If you're having a hard time getting it to absorb the paint, or if it's absorbing it too much, you can thin it out. So this was probably the most difficult part of painting him, just because those little crevices in the underside of his ribs, that was like a remarkably tight area to get my hand into, and I have pretty small hands, so if you have like, if you have larger hands than I do, you might need to get like a longer handled brush and sort of just try to like drip it into those nooks and crannies sitting in the back of his ribs there. And here I didn't really wipe back that much. I ended up just sort of letting it pool in there and dry, because also that sort of brings out the detail in the ribs too, since they're not front and center, since they're sort of tucked in the back there. Having them be a little bit darker actually worked out well. And for some of those like tighter spaces up at the top, you're going to want to get a smaller paintbrush and just sort of like wedge it in there as best you can. Like I said, if you can't get your hand in there, just sort of flood it with as much watery paint as you can, and then when you flip him over, like I've turned him over so he's lying on his stomach here, the excess will drip out. And now what I'm using him for, you're not going to actually be able to see a large part of his back, or his bones really for that fact of the matter. Now you can see that I didn't end up filling in the back with the spackle. It's because you won't see that for the configuration that I'm using him in. But if you're going to have a skeleton that was visible like all the way around like a 360 view, you'll want to go ahead and cover every screw that you can. So here now I'm adding more shading, like our final layer of paint to the face. Now, since he's obviously very like yellow and brown toned, I wanted to sort of get like a gray-based paint in his eyes and his nose to sort of just make it look dirtier, like maybe like dust collected in his eye sockets and his nose over the years. So here I'm just kind of playing with that to see what I want it to look like. We're going to be adding more to his face in the second video of this project that'll kind of like soften everything. But here you're just kind of going to play with it until you get a nice base wash where you bring out all those details and it doesn't look like just heavy-handed blobs of paint.
Okay, so that is our 5-foot tall plastic cheap skeleton from Walmart, all finished up, antiqued and aged. So like I said, in the next video, I'll be showing you how we're going to display our skeleton. So like there's a little bit of a hint in that last shot of the skeleton there, so if you can give a guess as to what you think he's going to be, I'd love to know. And otherwise, I will see you in the next video where we finish up displaying him and putting everything together. So I hope you enjoyed this. Stay tuned for the next video, and I will see you soon. All right.